In 2021, a truck driver in America could earn approximately $1 per mile in profit. By 2023, that number had collapsed to 3 cents per mile, while their operating costs remained at 40 cents per mile. NBC News reported that, not a trucking blog, not a Reddit post, NBC News. 3 cents per mile in profit against 40 cents per mile in costs. That means for every mile a truck driver drove in 2023, they lost 37 cents. They were paying to work. And the freight recession that caused that collapse has now lasted longer than 4 years, making it the longest trucking downturn in the history of the American freight industry. And the reason that matters to you, even if you have never driven a truck, never loaded a trailer, never looked at a load board in your life, is that trucking is the circulatory system of the American economy. 72% of everything in America moves by truck. The food on your table, the medicine in your cabinet, the gasoline in the pump, the clothes on your back, the parts in your car, the materials that built your house. If it is in your possession right now, a truck brought it to you. And the people who drive those trucks, the 3.5 million Americans who spend 300 days a year on the highway watching the economy from the windshield, have been telling anyone who will listen that what they are seeing on the road does not match what they are hearing on the news. The load boards are empty, the warehouses are quiet, the parking lots at distribution centers that used to overflow with trailers are half full, and the drivers who survived the worst freight recession in history are now watching a war-driven diesel price spike threaten to finish what the freight recession started. Truck drivers see economic downturns before anyone else because they see freight volume before it becomes a GDP number. They see empty trailers before it becomes an inventory report. They see closed warehouses before it becomes an employment statistic. And right now, in April of 2026, what they are seeing is scaring them. And I need to explain why that should scare you too, even if you have never thought about the trucking industry for a single moment in your life, because every major economic downturn in modern American history was preceded by a decline in freight volumes. Before the 2008 financial crisis, truck tonnage declined for 8 consecutive months, starting in early 2007. Before the 2001 recession, freight volumes dropped in the second half of 2000. Before the 1990 recession, trucking activity slowed throughout 1989. The pattern is so consistent that economists at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland have used freight volume data as a leading indicator in their recession probability models. When trucks stop moving goods, it means factories are producing less, retailers are ordering less, consumers are buying less, and the entire chain of economic activity that connects production to consumption is contracting. The truck driver does not need a Bloomberg terminal to know this. They know it because the load board that used to have 50 available loads on their preferred lane now has 12. They know it because the shipper who used to call them back within an hour now takes 3 days. They know it because the rate that used to be $2.80 per mile is now $1.90. They know it because the truck stop that used to be full at 9 p.m. now has empty spaces at 6 p.m. And they know that when the parking lot empties, it is not because drivers found better routes. It is because drivers left the industry. And when drivers leave the industry during a slowdown, the slowdown has reached the point where the people closest to the economy have decided it is no longer worth the cost of participating. The freight recession has lasted over 4 years, and the carnage it left behind is staggering. The current freight recession began in April of 2022, when the pandemic-era shipping boom collapsed and demand for physical goods declined, as consumers shifted their spending from products back to services, travel, dining, and entertainment. What nobody predicted was how long the downturn would last. Freight recessions typically run 12 to 18 months. This one has lasted over 4 years and counting. FreightWaves, the industry's most widely followed data source, called it the __quote_0__. And the toll on trucking companies has been catastrophic. Carrier bankruptcies have spiked 41% over the past 2 years, according to industry data. FreightWaves documented that more than 2,000 workers were laid off across logistics and manufacturing firms in just the opening weeks of 2026, driven by facility closures, lost contracts, and bankruptcy filings. Major logistics brands are filing for Chapter 11 not to grow, but to shed debt. Queen Transportation shut down abruptly, leaving drivers and office staff suddenly unemployed with no warning. Standard Forwarding Freight, a regional carrier, shut down operations entirely. Montgomery Transport filed for Chapter 7 liquidation and ceased operations immediately. A Detroit-based grocery hauling company with over 300 trucks filed for bankruptcy alongside several partner companies. Penske Logistics laid off 337 warehouse workers in Missouri. Koehne & Nagel, a global logistics bellwether, announced plans to cut 2,000 workers. Balkan Express and its affiliate brokerage filed for Chapter 11, citing $25 million in debts. Texas International Enterprises warned in court documents that no funds would remain for unsecured creditors. CRST confirmed a reduction of almost 200 trucks from its over-the-road business unit. And those are just the names that made the news. For every carrier large enough to generate a headline when it fails, dozens of owner-operators quietly parked their rigs, surrendered their plates, defaulted on their equipment loans, and walked away from the industry without anyone noticing. The American Trucking Association estimates a current shortage of 60,000 drivers, but that number is misleading because the shortage coexists with excess capacity. The drivers who left during the freight recession are not coming back. The drivers who stayed are running on margins so thin that a single diesel price spike, a single insurance increase, or a single bad month of loads can push them from survival to insolvency. And the load boards, where available freight is posted for drivers to bid on, looked, as one industry publication put it, like a hot dog you buy at a truck stop. Empty. Diesel just went from $3.50 to over $4.50 because of a war that most truck drivers did not ask for and cannot absorb. Everything in the trucking economy runs on diesel. A Class 8 semi-truck gets approximately 6 miles per gallon. An average long-haul route covers 500 to 600 miles per day. That means a truck consumes 80 to 100 gallons of diesel per day. At $3.50 per gallon, the daily fuel cost is approximately $300. At $4.50, which is approximately where diesel sits in much of the country following the Iran war and the Strait of Hormuz disruption, the daily fuel cost is $400 to $450. That is an additional $100 to $150 per day in operating costs. Per truck. Per day. For an owner-operator running a single truck, that $100 to $150 per day translates to approximately $3,000 to $4,000, $500 per month in additional fuel expense. And the driver who was earning 3 cents per mile in profit before the diesel spike is now earning negative 10 to 15 cents per mile. They are not breaking even, they are hemorrhaging money on every load they haul. And the fuel surcharge system that is supposed to protect carriers from diesel price spikes does not fully compensate because surcharges are typically calculated on a lagging basis, using the Department of Energy's weekly diesel price report from the prior week or prior month, which means the driver is paying today's diesel price but receiving last month's fuel surcharge. The gap between the current pump price and the surcharge recovery eats directly into the driver's margin. And for the owner-operator who financed a $180,000 truck at the peak of the pandemic boom, who is making monthly payments of $2,500 to $3,500, who is paying $1,500 to $2,500 per month in insurance premiums that have risen dramatically since 2022, and who is now absorbing $3,000 to $4,500 in additional monthly fuel costs on top of all of that. The math has become impossible. The cost of operating the truck exceeds the revenue the truck generates. And when that equation flips, the truck gets parked. The loan goes into default. The driver enters the statistics as another casualty of the freight recession. And one more truck leaves the road, reducing the capacity that the economy will eventually need when demand returns. Because demand always returns. But the trucks and drivers that were destroyed during the downturn do not magically reappear. The industry is eating its own seed corn, and the timing of the diesel spike could not be worse. The Iran war began on February 28, 2026, with U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran. Iran retaliated by closing the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows. Brent crude surged from $70 to $120 per barrel. The IEA called it the greatest global energy security challenge in history. American gasoline prices climbed above $4 per gallon. Diesel climbed proportionally. And for the trucking industry, diesel is not a variable expense that can be reduced through efficiency. The truck burns what it burns. There is no setting the thermostat lower. The 2 million Class 8 trucks currently operating are diesel trucks. They will be diesel trucks for the next 10 to 15 years of their remaining useful life. And every one of them is now burning fuel that costs 30 to 40% more than it did 8 weeks ago because of a war launched without congressional authorization that no truck driver was consulted about or benefits from. The $580 million in oil futures trades, placed 15 minutes before Trump's March 23 ceasefire statement, documented by the Financial Times, tells you who is profiting from the diesel price spike. It is not the driver filling a 150-gallon tank at $4.50 per gallon at the TA truck stop at 3 in the morning. And when the economy needs freight capacity again, it will discover that the capacity was destroyed during the years when nobody was paying attention. The Class 8 truck itself now costs $10,000 more because of tariffs, and the insurance crisis is crushing everyone left standing. Dean Croak, principal analyst at DAT Freight and Analytics, projected that the cost of a Class 8 truck in 2026 would increase by approximately $10,000 due to Section 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum content. A new Class 8 truck that cost $170,000 in 2022 now costs $180,000 or more. And the financing costs have increased simultaneously because interest rates are elevated, and the creditworthiness of the trucking industry as a whole has deteriorated after 4 years of freight recession. A truck purchased at $180,000, financed over 5 years at current commercial vehicle loan rates, generates a monthly payment north of $3,500. Add insurance at $1,500 to $2,500 per month. Add diesel at $12,000 to $15,000 per month at current prices. Add maintenance, tires, tolls, permits, and compliance costs. And the total monthly operating cost of a single truck is approaching $20,000 to $25,000 per month before the driver pays themselves a single dollar. That means the truck must generate $20,000 to $25,000 per month in gross revenue just to cover costs. And in a freight market where spot rates have been depressed for 4 years, where the load-to-truck ratio is only slowly recovering, and where competition for available loads pushes rates to the floor, generating $20,000 to $25,000 per month in gross revenue, requires hauling approximately 8,000 to 10,000 miles per month at rates of $2.50 per mile. And the current average spot rate for dry van freight is below that threshold in most lanes, which means the math only works if the driver runs contract freight with a guaranteed rate, has a fuel surcharge that actually covers current diesel costs, never has a mechanical breakdown, never has a single empty day without a load, and never encounters weather, road conditions, or shipper delays that reduce their daily mileage below the target. The margin for error is zero. A blown turbo costs $3,000 to $5,000 to replace. A set of drive tires costs $4,000 to $6,000. A transmission rebuild costs $8,000 to $12,000. A DOT inspection violation can take a truck off the road for days, generating zero revenue, while payments and insurance continue to accrue. And the insurance market for trucking has tightened dramatically since 2022, with premiums rising 20 to 40% because nuclear verdicts, those multi-million-dollar jury awards, have made commercial trucking one of the highest risk insurance segments. Some small carriers pay annual premiums exceeding $30,000 per truck, which is $2,500 per month before the truck moves a mile. The insurance cost alone, before fuel, payments, maintenance, tolls, and the driver's own compensation, is $2,500 per month. And FMCSA compliance scores now affect freight access, as brokers and shippers monitor safety ratings when selecting carriers. A single violation can blacklist a small carrier from load boards, cutting off access to the freight that would keep them alive. That is why carriers are filing for bankruptcy at a 41% increased rate. That is why drivers are parking trucks. That is why the freight recession is not just a freight story. It is a story about the destruction of the infrastructure that moves everything you buy, eat, wear, and use. And the people who understand that destruction best are the drivers who are living it, mile by mile, load by load, diesel receipt by diesel receipt. The government is removing drivers from the road at a rate that no one in the industry has ever seen. Jason Sadel, managing director at the investment banking company TD Cowen, told Transport Topics something that should have been a national headline but was barely covered outside the trade press. He said that the government is coming after capacity at a rate that he has never seen in over 30 years in the industry. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has stepped up enforcement of English language proficiency requirements for truck drivers and tightened scrutiny on the issuance of non-domiciled commercial driver licenses. The Department of Transportation has drastically restricted eligibility for non-domiciled CDLs following a series of fatal crashes involving non-citizen truckers. The policy change removes drivers from the road. It reduces available capacity in the market. And the areas where the removal is concentrated, California, the Chicago corridor, and Texas, are three of the highest volume freight corridors in the country. Removing capacity from those corridors tightens the market in exactly the regions where the most freight moves. And a Senate report released in October 2025 estimated that nearly half of the nation's truck drivers could be replaced by artificial intelligence and automation within a decade. Half. That is 1.7 million drivers whose careers have an expiration date that they can see from the cab of their truck every time they pass a test vehicle from Waymo, Aurora, or Too Simple on the interstate. The driver shortage, the freight recession, the diesel spike, the tariff-driven cost increases, the insurance crisis, the CDL enforcement, and the AI automation timeline are all converging simultaneously on a workforce that was already demoralized, underpaid, overworked, and disrespected before any of this began. A truck driver in America today works 14-hour days, sleeps in a 7x7 sleeper berth, is away from home for weeks at a time, and is treated by the public as an anonymous obstacle on the highway rather than the essential worker who delivers every product that sustains modern American life. And the reward for that sacrifice is 3 cents per mile in profit. A $180,000 truck that costs $25,000 per month to operate. Diesel prices that are being driven by a war they did not start. And a government that is simultaneously removing their colleagues from the road and investing in robots to replace them. If you want to know what is coming for the American economy, ask a truck driver. Because the truck driver sees the economy from the inside, not from a Bloomberg terminal, not from a Federal Reserve press conference. From the cab of a truck that is driving past empty loading docks, past shuttered warehouses, past distribution centers with half-full parking lots, past truck stops where the drivers who used to fill every parking space are simply not there anymore. The truck driver sees it first. They see the loads that are not being posted. They see the warehouses that are not being restocked. They see the factories that are not shipping. They see the retailers that are not ordering. They see the ports that are not unloading. And they see it weeks or months before the GDP report catches up. What the freight data is actually telling us about the next 6 months of the American economy. Eric Starks, chairman of FTR Transportation Intelligence, told Transport Topics that uncertainty is the defining word for the trucking industry heading into 2026, and that his biggest worry is the underlying demand for freight. He said that if layoffs increase and the broader economy starts to ease, that will put additional pressure on trucking, and that the best-case scenario would be a flat market into Q1 2026, but that there could be noticeable softening in Q1 and Q2 if substantial layoffs materialize and the consumer pulls away. That interview was given before the Iran war, before the Strait of Hormuz closure, before the $4 per gallon gasoline, before the March CPI spike of 0.9%, before the consumer sentiment collapse to 47.6%, and before the IMF's recession warning. Every condition that Starks identified as a downside risk has since materialized. Dean Croak of DAT Freight said that manufacturing really stalled in 2025 and that the country became firmly entrenched in a goods recession. He noted that the large public carriers were talking about 2027 being the turnaround year, not 2026, and that 2026 would be the setup year before the market stabilizes. The Outbound Tender Reject Index, which is the industry's key measure of carrier bargaining power, rose from 4.3% in September 2024 to approximately 5.7% by late February 2026. A higher rejection rate means carriers are refusing cheap loads, which signals tightening capacity. But 5.7% is still historically low. During a healthy freight market, the OTRI typically runs between 10 and 15%. At 5.7%, the market is still firmly in the shipper's favor, meaning carriers are accepting loads at rates that barely cover costs because they cannot afford to refuse them. And the freight data mirrors the broader economic indicators. Consumer goods orders fell 0.1% over the past 3 months. Durable goods orders slowed to 0.5% growth. Payroll employment grew just 0.4% over the past year, with 90% of that growth in a single sector. The labor market is in a low-hire, low-fire equilibrium, where nothing is growing, but nothing is visibly collapsing. That equilibrium is what the truck driver sees from the road. Not a crash, not a boom. A slow, grinding, suffocating flat line where every month is a little harder than the last, where every load pays a little less, where every tank of diesel costs a little more, and where the exit ramp, the decision to park the truck and walk away from the industry forever, looks more rational with every passing week. And the truck driver knows, from 30 or 40 years of experience on the road, that when the trucks stop moving, the economy follows. Not the other way around. The trucks do not stop because the economy stops. The economy stops because the trucks stopped first. Newsweek published an investigation into the trucking industry titled "America's Trucking Industry is in Deep Trouble" that quoted Stephen Burks, a former truck driver who is now a professor of economics at the University of Minnesota. Burks argued that far from a shortage, the industry suffers from excess capacity as a result of demand falling since the post-COVID boom. He described the pandemic era as a period when becoming a truck driver was a golden handshake. followed by a decline in demand that has kept the industry in a freight recession since the back half of 2022. And Birx's analysis points to a deeper problem that trucking shares with the broader American economy. The system expands during booms by adding capacity, workers, and debt. When the boom ends, the excess capacity is destroyed through bankruptcy, layoff, and default. But the debt remains. The truck payments remain. The insurance premiums remain. The costs that were incurred during the expansion are fixed, but the revenue that was supposed to pay for them has evaporated. And the people who bear the cost of that mismatch are not the investors who funded the expansion or the executives who ordered the trucks. The people who bear the cost are the drivers who were recruited into the industry during the boom with promises of high pay and plentiful freight, who signed for trucks they could not afford at rates that no longer exist, and who are now trapped between payments they cannot make and loads that do not pay enough to cover them. That is the story of the American truck driver in 2026, and it is, in miniature, the story of the American worker in 2026, recruited during the boom, promised a future, loaded with debt, and abandoned when the market turned. The truck driver just sees it first because the truck driver is connected to every part of the economy through the freight they haul. When the economy weakens, the loads disappear from their screen before the reports appear on yours. And right now, in April of 2026, the loads are not there. The diesel is expensive. The payments are due. The insurance is climbing. The government is removing drivers. The AI companies are testing replacements. And the drivers who remain, the ones who survived 4 years of the worst freight recession in American history, are looking at the road ahead and telling anyone who will listen that what is coming is worse than what they have already been through. And if you are an American who eats food, takes medicine, drives a car, wears clothing, or lives in a building made of materials, you should listen. Because the truck driver is not guessing about what is coming. The truck driver is watching it arrive. One empty load board at a time. One shuttered warehouse at a time. One parked rig at a time. And by the time the GDP report confirms what the truck driver already knows, the damage will have already been done. Because economies do not break with a headline. They break one missing load at a time. And the truck drivers who have been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years will tell you that what they are seeing right now feels different from previous downturns. In previous recessions, the loads disappeared, but the system felt like it would recover. The infrastructure remained. The relationships remained. The carriers remained waiting. What feels different in 2026 is that the infrastructure itself is being dismantled. The carriers are not waiting. They are filing for bankruptcy. The warehouses are not holding inventory for a recovery. They are being converted to data centers. The distribution centers that used to hum with loading dock activity 18 hours a day are running at 60% capacity because the retailers they serve have shifted from a just-in-time inventory model to an even leaner model, where they carry less physical stock and rely on faster, smaller, more frequent deliveries that favor last-mile delivery services over traditional long-haul trucking. The structure of the freight economy is changing underneath the cyclical downturn. The downturn is masking a structural transformation that will leave the industry permanently smaller, more concentrated, more automated, and less reliant on the independent owner-operator who has been the backbone of American freight for 50 years. And the driver, who has been doing this since the 1990s, can feel the difference even if they cannot name it. They feel it in the types of loads available. Fewer full truckloads, more partial loads, more deadhead miles between pickups, more time waiting at shipper facilities for loads that used to be staged and ready, more pressure from brokers to accept rates that do not cover operating costs, more electronic logging device violations because the delivery windows are tighter than the hours of service rules allow. The entire system is squeezing the driver from every direction simultaneously. And the driver, sitting in a truck stop at midnight, scrolling through a load board with nothing on it, watching the diesel price on the canopy sign climb another nickel while they wait for a load that may not come, knows exactly what is happening to the American economy. They know it before the economists know it. They know it before the politicians know it. They know it before you know it, because they are sitting inside the economy's bloodstream, and the blood is not flowing. And the people who have spent their careers moving that blood, the 3.5 million truck drivers who kept this country alive during the pandemic, who delivered the PPE and the ventilators and the vaccines and the toilet paper and the groceries while everyone else stayed home, are now being told by the market, by the government, and by the technology companies that their labor is too expensive, their trucks are too old, their CDLs are too questionable, and their careers are too temporary to justify the investment that would make their industry sustainable. The people who kept America alive in 2020 are being discarded by America in 2026. And they know it. Every mile they drive, they know it. And if you eat food tonight, or take medicine, or put gas in your car, or turn on a light, you are connected to the truck driver who brought every one of those things to you. Their crisis is your crisis. You just have not felt it yet.